Welcome back, everyone. We are continuing, or rather, we are about to finish up our month focused on the military and service members. And we are so excited to have with us today Sean Osman, who's going to be talking about some of the community support that's available. I can tell you that I've now gotten into the point where I've created the summary of what we're going to write and what I have found as we're going around the country, and I have been blown away, honestly. There are so many people that are dedicated to helping our vets, that are dedicated to serving this country, and there are a lot of people who wish they could serve who aren't able to for a variety of eligibility reasons. And so we will be putting that into the strategy and looking at it as a national service strategy to include military, but not only focus on military. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and bring him in. We're just connecting right now. So the strategy should be ready by, I'm hoping, by Sunday. However, there is a chance with the hurricane coming and I'm heading to Florida that we may be a bit delayed. So we shall see how. Hello.
Hi there.
Hey, so glad to have you. We've already done a little bit of an intro. So if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So my background, I'm in the Marine Corps Reserve. Been in for a little bit over 20 years. Field radio operations by kind of by trade. Did a few years with acquisitions at a local command here called PM Traces, which it's the acquisitions group for the Marine Corps that does minor training aids. So if you need rubberized weapons that you would use in training scenarios, you do that. A lot of computer-based training as well. And right now, my civilian occupation is I work for a company called AVT Simulation in Orlando, and we do a little bit of everything. We actually make our own trainers. We teach folks how to fly helicopters, teach people how to drive around in ground vehicles, and try and find good ways to make sure that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines can all be a little bit safer in what they do every day.
So you cover the gamut from a training perspective. For those who don't know the acronyms, PM Traces stands for Program Manager for Training Systems, and that's for
Awesome.
the Marine Corps.
Sorry. If I hit you with alphabet soup, please stop me. It's part of the trade.
I am quite used to it, but not everybody that watches is. And one of the things that I've been really passionate about in this journey, which is truly, I call it my nerd journey, really, right? Because I've been interviewing people from all these different areas, some of which I have expertise in, which is why I know these acronyms offhand, and others that I don't have as much expertise in, but all the while trying to better understand what are the capabilities and assets that we have across this country that we might be able to pull together to be able to improve national readiness. So this is in direct agreement and in parallel to what you just described, but what you just described is specifically for the military. So that's certainly the model that I use. And I want to kind of pull apart what you just said,
Sure.
Especially for those who are not familiar with all of the terms. The first one, Marine Corps Reserves. Everyone knows that term. Not everybody knows functionally how that works. So can you break that down a little bit for us as far as time? How is rank the same or different in the way that the structure is compared to full-time active duty? And then how do you work in your job as well?
Sure. So there's a couple different things. One, the reserves doesn't necessarily apply to everybody that does part-time military service. So the two major things that you're going to run into is you have National Guard, which is a group for both the Army and the Air Force, which is run through the National Guard Bureau. And that's a state-by-state pullout for services specifically benefiting the individual states for their protection, but they also augment the active duty component as well. The reserves is actually a structure that is put in place to augment the active duty component in the event of a wartime scenario. The Marine Corps is a little bit unusual in the fact that we as a service cannot move without the reserves. And that's kind of a weird thing for most people to think. But the reason why is that we don't always need a 100% standing military, and that's where the reserves comes in. We can do a lot of professional development. A lot of our officers have prior reserve time as enlisted folks, and basically the usual slogan of 2 weeks or 2 days a month and 2 weeks a year, you go in at least once a month to do your annual training. We get all of our big stuff out of the way, and we prepare to be able to do our actual MOS, or military occupational specialty, which makes sure that when the flag does go up and we do need to deploy, like 2003, 2004, 2005, those were all times that I got called up to go do things. It was specifically to help out the active duty folks. And it's both a cost savings for the government, and it also kind of gives you a neat injection of other skill sets. A lot of folks that are in my reserves, I have a lot of law enforcement, a lot of EMTs, I have teachers, I have paralegals. I have one Marine that he runs a steel mill, which is kind of a unique skill set. So you get a much wider variety of backgrounds. So if there is an alternative need for them, you may have some folks that can help you out with that. So that's kind of where we come in as a reserve corps.
And what made you decide to go into the reserves as opposed to, say, the National Guard or full-time active duty?
So one of the things is I knew that I wanted to go to college, and the GI Bill is always a great example of benefits that you get that you can still get as a reservist that you would also get as active duty. I knew that I wanted to go in and do something that I felt like I needed a college degree, but I also I'm an only child, and I had a lot of those stereotypical only children behaviors. And I knew that I needed to do something to kind of grow me up and get me into a place where I knew that I could perform professionally. Marine Corps has been great for that. I've gotten to travel around the world. I've gotten to do a lot of things that I never would have gotten to do, and professionally, it's been amazing to have those leadership opportunities. I got my first fire team, which is a group of three Marines, when I was 19. There's not a lot of folks that start doing an actual management position at 19. So that's kind of where it came up from.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, one of the things that I was actually writing about this morning was the question, should we be expanding the definition of service?
Sure.
Because right now we are looking at, from the ages 17 to 24, only 29% of Americans are even eligible. And
Absolutely.
a lot of this comes down to both educational and incredibly physical issues that individuals have faced. And so we run into this problem where we have some people that would love to serve, but can't because of those eligibility requirements. But what you just described is something that I think is really interesting. There are all these other supportive jobs that are beneficial to
Very
the
much
Marine
so.
Corps. Yeah. And so I wonder, and I know I'm kind of asking you to go out on a limb, but if you imagine kind of that expansive concept and thought about young people being able to be in the reserve position that maybe aren't as physically adept or able. So perhaps someone who is wheelchair bound but can be a drone operator, or someone that is able to get into cyber defense. What from your experience and what you've seen in training might still allow somebody to serve?
Sure.
Or do you think it totally is not possible?
Well, I'm going to immediately go back to my usual disclaimer of I am not speaking on behalf of the Marine Corps or any service at this point. So my 2 cents is, like we had mentioned, drone operators. Anything that I would consider in a combat arms, I would want that person to be a uniformed service member. So alternative methods for filling that, I don't know if that's necessarily the best choice. And I only say that because making that choice to pull a trigger, there's a certain part of you that needs to be assessed with that, and I don't know that a civilian may necessarily be the best one for that. Now, the area that you hit on, and me as a communicator by trade, cyber is absolutely a place that I think that could be handled with that. Right now, cyber is a tough place to be in, and one of the biggest reasons for that is it's really hard to keep up pay-wise and compensation-wise with what industry is willing to pay. The military does a great job in terms of pay and benefits, but the reality is I can take somebody even without a college education, and I'm pretty well sure if they know how to do some what we call black hat or gray hat hacking, your ethical hackers that might do some things and then let you know after the fact, those folks are getting hired on for 120 plus right out the gate with no college training. It's really hard to compete with that. So when we look at like a GS scale or a government services scale where you can be a government civilian, I really think that might be the better place because you have the capacity to pay somebody a little bit more than you would, say, a brand new Lance Corporal. So I think there's some good opportunities in that realm. I see it a lot, on the reserve side as well. There's a lot of my guys that can do some amazing things, and being able to use them through some of the special title programs that are out there to basically have them on both sides of the fence I think there's some good opportunity for expansion there that hasn't been utilized.
Yeah, I definitely think cyber is one. We've actually done a little bit of a series on that, recognizing that we have to build up the pipeline.
Sure.
So looking at how we help with our young people in programs like Cyber Patriot, to looking at some of the NSA, and actually I'm heading to Colorado on the 9th, and we're doing a Hacking for Defense education program out there, working with some of the folks that come out of the Pentagon. Because yeah, it's a major issue and it's a major question. I'll flip the question around though.
Sure.
I was recently at one of the retirement programs for Colonel Walt Yates.
Sure.
And so when they were talking about it, one of the things they said was that the Marine Corps not only builds great individuals to participate in the Corps, but they also develop and train individuals to be amazing Americans.
Absolutely.
And this is something that, in our country has been coming up a lot. How do we help instill some of these resiliency and decision-making under stress and capabilities and respect for the country? And it's something that I feel like we get, I didn't serve, but I always say I serve those who serve. I've been professionally raised in this culture. Being part of this culture has changed the way I act and operate. And I'm trying to think of ways that we can help instill that in young people. Is the reserves a place where that could be expanded? Or is it really that it needs to be such a warrior mindset that we aren't able to expand into civilian space?
So I think by the time that you get to the point where it's time to make that call of, am I going to enlist? Am I going to go into college and seek out getting my commission to become an officer? I think you're almost too late at that point. And the reason why I say that is I feel like there is so much opportunity to develop those types of things through volunteerism. Cyber being one of those things, youth development programs through things like the Navy's program with the Navy League and the Sea Cadets. They have they have a great program through there. The Civil Air Patrol has a program for that. Another one is just getting folks to get familiar with the military. One of the things we do here is all of our employees can bring their kids in to be interns and getting them familiar with what is this weird DoD space. Right behind me, and I don't want to dime them out and put them on the camera, but I have a retired chief petty officer behind me that's teaching his kid how to do 3D printing. And there he is there.
We got a wave.
Yeah, I was going to say he came over to say hi. But getting folks to be familiar with what their military is, there's a lot of opportunity through volunteerism to do that. And a lot of folks, they feel like they're too busy. And you have to roll back to, I get a lot of folks that, get your parents to get you involved in something. I don't care what you do, something that gives back to the community. Because in order to be in the military, especially on the uniform side of the house, you have to be willing to take some pain to give back to your community. It's literally part of the job description. So coming up, I came up in Boy Scouts. I came up with a ton of friends in ROTC. A lot of community service programs, doing those kind of things, getting involved with internships as a before you get into the professional world, know what your options are. And that kind of ties you back to the community. You can't really feel like you're, I'll say, a good American unless you get what it is that you're trying to put more work into. So going through doing programs like the Marine Corps League with the Young Marines, Navy League with the Sea Cadets, pick a youth program. And you don't have to have served to be able to give back to those programs. If you want to thank somebody for their service, come out and make the next generation better prepared to take over for them. That's kind of where I would like to see more folks getting involved.
Yeah, I agree. So, though you don't know, my daughter was chief petty officer of the Sea Cadets locally. And
awesome!
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And she just started her ROTC Army for cyber up in New York on Friday. So we're
awesome.
3 days in.
Good deal.
And so yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are such a supportive family in this endeavor because I feel so strongly that we've got to get our young people involved in these programs. But I find that, we found it by happenstance.
Sure.
Right? I work in this industry and I found it by happenstance. She happened to be sitting next to a kid on a bus who one day said something to her, and we looked it up and said, absolutely, let's get involved. But we're not getting it outside our community as much, and getting it out beyond the families that are already part of the system.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to find a way to do that. and I'm kind of thinking this on the fly, but I'm thinking some of us probably need to do more and more of this kind of speaking and helping to reach those families who don't know these programs exist,
Sure.
and encouraging that pipeline upward, and beyond. So let's change gears to a little bit of the training readiness piece. Again,
Absolutely.
an area near and dear to my heart. Modeling and simulation, as I've said in some other calls, is hubbed in Orlando, where you, of course, are located. And this is the hub internationally, so this is huge. For those who don't know what modeling and simulation is, can you give us a little bit of a background, and particularly tie it to a story of how it becomes important and helpful when you do have to deploy?
Sure. So the Reader's Digest version for what is modeling and simulation, I'm going to put it in a gaming term, and then I'm going to put it more in an industry term. So if you ever play a video game, be it Call of Duty, pick a thing that's kind of fun to play. Everything that you see on the screen has had to have been designed, modeled, and turned into some sort of behavior. So if your character moves kind of wonky and it doesn't look real, that's going to be something that kind of breaks you out of that game and doesn't make it quite as much fun. We see the same thing on the industry side. So when we go through, we have to make sure if I'm building an Abrams tank, I need to make sure that Abrams tank actually drives and shoots the way that it does. If I'm going to be making a trainer for an Apache, I need to make sure that it actually flies the way the real aircraft does. Those are really critical things to make sure when I'm teaching folks that are going to be out and doing this, that they're not getting what, the breakdown version of it is negative training. I don't want to teach somebody a bad habit that they might replicate in the real thing and do something really bad. So where that kind of comes in on the industry side is, like, I came up in a time where, especially 2001 to 2003, we had trainers for the big stuff. Like if you were flying something, I guarantee you were in a simulator before you actually got up there. If you were driving a tank, if you're going to be lobbing a 120 millimeter cannon round at something, you probably want to make sure you know how to aim the thing. So the really big things that were out there, they had trainers. What we started seeing is we needed things for, I'll say, the lesser price sensitive type things. Humvee drivers, for example. My first time deploying out, we had all soft top Humvees. So no body armor, no hardened doors. Like my first Humvee when I went into Iraq had 2 of the 4 doors. And there's stories that can go along with that. But those vehicles drove one specific way. We trained on them in the States. We drove them everywhere. That's how we got our licenses. We drove them in our primary schools, and then we drove them in theater. Pretty quickly, we figured out that driving around a soft-sided vehicle in a place where people are trying to do bad things to you probably isn't the best of ideas. So we started providing up armor, which is your hard side doors, all the hardened glass or the bullet-resistant glass. We had turrets that we were putting on top. And when you add all that weight in, suddenly your center of gravity went from here to up here. We never told anybody that the vehicle drove different. So the first time that we actually sent folks out to go drive in these now up-armored with a turret on top vehicle, that now the center of gravity has basically gone from like your knee level up to your chest level, they were still trying to take a turn at 35 miles an hour with a gunner up top, and now the vehicle is flipping. So we pretty quickly recognized that behavior, we needed to model what that new vehicle did. We needed to model the physics of it. So figure out how does the vehicle drive and turn that into an actual gamified representation and teach our drivers before they ever got in the vehicle. Because when you get in the vehicle, it's too late. You're already going to be putting into those risky behaviors, so we trained them ahead of time. We put everybody in, we started training them. The next time we went out, we had 0 rollovers. So for me, going from having 5 rollovers in a deployment to no rollovers in a deployment, simply by adding a couple of hours in a trainer, I didn't have to send anybody home, didn't break any vehicles, didn't lose any capacity. That's where that need comes in. And it's the same thing when we have any other, even the more expensive vehicles. If we put new optics on and now you can see something. If we have a new weapon system that can now shoot 6,000 meters versus 4,000 meters, that's a huge difference. Being able to train folks up in that, that's what we do.
And there's another side to it as well, is there not, when we talk about human interaction?
Absolutely. So I'm guessing you're probably going after the collective side of things, or what we call when we take multiple,
both sides,
human in the loop. It's hard. Most folks, we're having a conversation. This is easy. It's basically a telephone call with some video to go along. Not hard. Now, if I put you in a vehicle and you're communicating with 4 people inside of that, and oh, by the way, I have 4 other vehicles outside of me that I'm supposed to be functioning as a unit moving somewhere, that suddenly gets really complicated. So especially when you're talking your folks, then you've got your higher level command, then you've got the folks outside of that, and forget about it if you start adding in, oh, I've got artillery, I have aviation support, and I've got a ship somewhere behind me that wants to lob in ship to shore fire. That got exponentially more complicated in no time flat. So teaching people how to talk again in that type of an environment is a huge thing. And it is a lot less expensive and a lot less painful to do that in simulation, where I can replicate some worst case scenarios and make you work through that, than having to figure that out when the rounds are actually going the wrong way for the first time. So that human communication, that human user part is absolutely critical in trying to do simulation.
Yeah, and so we have to cover both the physical and the human interaction part. And I'll give the quote from former Secretary Mattis. He used to always say, "We want to see 20 bloodless battles before you go into theater."
Picked my favorite
And
general.
we were just having a conversation about him this morning. He was in the news again, and my run every month I do a run to kind of capture the month-long focus on the area that we're talking about. And this month we're supporting Mission 22,
Awesome.
which is so you're familiar.
I am indeed.
They're trying to combat suicide for vets, which is an incredibly important area. And as a psychologist, there was a reason we chose this group. But I always make a T-shirt, and this month's T-shirt is "Lead with the Power of Inspiration, backed by the power of intimidation," which is a compilation of Mattis's points. He always used to say that we have to look forward and be positive and lift people up and utilize all of our human abilities and be prepared at the same time, always at readiness for anything that comes our way. But never enter a situation you haven't seen multiple times before and had the benefit of either reading from or living in a simulator.
Absolutely.
To know what other people have experienced. Yeah, that collective experience, which is really beneficial.
Yeah,
and we can do that.
And we see that a lot with, we'll get requests when we're going through. A lot of folks, they want to have a ready-to-go training scenario that they can put folks in. So we're actually going through the process, and we will recreate historical battles and say, okay, I'm going to play your game. I'm not going to tell you what happened here. We already know what went right and what went wrong. I want to see how you would do it better. And when we get into talking about the after-action review, which is basically figuring out what went right, what went wrong, but the more important part of that is how do we assess the decision-making skills of those individuals? When you decided to make whatever that critical action was, how did you make it better, or where could you have been improved upon? And that gives everybody, all the way down to the lowest folks, all the way to the highest, the opportunity to stress test not only themselves, but see where their peers are in comparison to them. So it's a great opportunity to flex that simulated muscle as well for training.
Yeah, can you imagine if we did this for every area of readiness in our country?
We can dream.
Well, that is my mission 100%, because what you just described, we are so used to talking about, but in the civilian world, it is not common discussion. And wouldn't it be amazing if we said, before you go out and do this job, or go out and make this claim, or go out and build this thing, that you take the time to do this simulation, get the feedback you need, figure out what you know, what you don't know, what you need to know in order to move forward better. Wow, we would really be much more effective. So I have one last question for you,
Sure.
Kind of tying a bow around this. And this is one that I hear a lot on the news. I think a lot of people don't understand, and which is why I'm going to ask the question.
Sure.
All that you described is the connection between contractor space and government military space. The question often becomes, why can't we just do it through the military, where it is assumed to be cheaper, and sometimes in fact is, versus using contractors and companies that are outside entities that are connected to DoD?
Sure.
What is the benefit of using the contractor space?
So there's a lot of different benefits. The first one is just like you had mentioned earlier, being able to serve even if you're not necessarily in uniform. Small companies like ABT, this was literally homegrown. The founder, Robert, literally started this company in his garage because he had a good idea that he thought could train military folks better. He had never served a day in his life, but he wanted to give back to the military folks. He brought in experts. He brought in folks that had done this job for 20 plus years and had retired out. One of the big things that you get from being able to go into the contractor space is I can go out and I can find somebody that flew for 30 years that by time and grade, they can't be in the military anymore. I don't want to lose that expertise. That is a giant knowledge gap that's going to suddenly take place. I can keep those folks with decades of experience, and they know what works and what doesn't, and I can put them to use to try and help out and continue to grow the next generation. That's a massive part of that. Additionally, let's be honest, the military should have one specific mission, and it's not necessarily to build a widget. If we're employing military force, that should apply one particular thing. Now, I'm saying this as one group that, I was not brought up with a lot of the capabilities that my sister services has in terms of being able to do a lot of the building, but we got one mission. And having a good, solid contractor corps behind us, and especially a group of government civilians that are helping to lead those contractor teams, is massive. It frees up the folks that are in the military, that are in uniform, to go and do the job that we were brought on board to do. And the contractors can use the decades of experience that may not be able to carry on a fight anymore, but they're still going to know how to make things better. So putting that knowledge to use, making sure that you keep people in the family, make sure that you keep all of that knowledge in-house to make it better, that's where contractors come in. And you also get small companies like us here at ABT. If we have a good idea, we go and we build it. You don't necessarily have the capacity to do that if you're a government person. I can't just go out and be like, hey, I'm going to go spend $2 million on an internal research thing because I think it's a good idea. That would never fly in a government meeting.
No.
And it's because the government is charged.
For that.
Yeah, and I mean, as a government employee or a government civilian, you have to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers are not going to be too thrilled if you say, hey, I had a good idea and it didn't work. They want results.
Right.
So industry can take on that risk where the government can't. And that's really where you see that tie in. It's where you get a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. And like I said, it makes sure that there's a way to retain all of that knowledge. Just because you retired out of the service doesn't mean that you have to stop serving. And that, I think, is a critical linkage that you wouldn't get if we weren't doing that type of operation.
I couldn't agree more. And I loved your term. I don't know if you meant to throw it in there, but contracting corps.
Yeah.
I've never heard that term, but that is where you're helping me put this together, this strategy, because in my mind, I'm thinking expanding the definition of service doesn't necessarily mean everyone's active duty.
Sure.
It does mean people are doing in the volunteer space. Can we find a way to use words that recognize the service that people are bringing through contracting? And I mean, of course, our active duty and our reserve duty individuals are our highest group. But I think when we give some recognition to everyone serving this country and helping to lift them up, I think in many ways we not only bring all of the expertise, credentials, but also dedication you just described.
Sure.
I think we also build a patriotism in people that I think is really beneficial, and recognizing the different skill sets that people have. I think that can be really important. I know I can speak for myself and some of the other women my age. We can't serve in the military simply
Sure.
because we're too old. I know it's hard when I get to the point where I say, no, really, I am a middle-aged woman.
I was going to say, I just hit 20 years, so yeah, I'm feeling the years starting to pile on as well. I can understand that.
Oh man, I know, I get it all the time. Well, you could join. I'm like, no, I'm not even close to within the age space. So it is wonderful to feel like we can contribute in some capacity, and I would love to see more people have that opportunity. Shane, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. I've really, really enjoyed your candor and enthusiasm, and I hope that a lot of folks are able to watch and learn a little bit more. Not only, I mean, because you cover so many spaces.
Sure.
So be able to learn from all of these. Thank you, Sean. We appreciate it.
Most definitely. You have a good rest of the day. Take care.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.